Before dawn, before the first bird breaks the silence, a fire is already breathing. Its coals glow low against the dark earth. Smoke moves slowly between the trees, carrying the scent of wet leaves, stone, and something warm beginning to cook. Beside the fire, hands move with a rhythm older than memory. A woman kneels over a grinding stone. Her palms are dusted with meal. Her shoulders carry the quiet weight of work done every day and every season by those who knew that survival was not a single act of courage, but 1,000 careful gestures repeated with patience. Somewhere far to the north, a canoe drifts through morning mist, bending wild rice over the water. Somewhere near the desert, blue corn batter spreads thin across a heated stone. In the high Andes, frost settles on potatoes left beneath the stars, turning cold itself into a tool. On a Caribbean island, grated cassava is pressed until its dangerous bitterness is drawn away. In forests, valleys, mountains, wetlands, and cities of stone, ancient cooks shaped the foods of a world that was already full of knowledge. Before Columbus, the Americas were not empty lands waiting to be fed by others. They were lands of farmers, fishers, hunters, gatherers, traders, builders, mothers, grandparents, and children. Lands where maize was transformed by fire and mineral ash, where beans climbed corn stalks, where squash shaded the soil, where salmon was smoked for winter, cacao was poured as a bitter drink, and the earth itself became an oven. These were not just meals. They were maps of survival. They were calendars. They were memories. They were the taste of a place carried in the hands of people who listened closely to land and water. And so we begin with 20 dishes, not as curiosities, not as relics, but as living traces of ancient skill. 20. Acorn mush. In the oak woodlands of what is now California, autumn once arrived with a sound like rain. Acorns fell through dry leaves and struck the ground in small, hollow taps. To an outsider, they might have seemed like simple nuts scattered by the season. But to many indigenous communities of California, acorns were a serious food, a dependable food, and a food that demanded respect. No one could simply gather them and eat without knowledge. Many acorns carry bitterness that must be patiently removed. The work began with selection. Good acorns were gathered, dried, cracked, and shelled. Then came grinding, steady, repetitive, shoulder-aching work on stone. The meal was sifted and washed, sometimes again and again, as water drew away the tannins. Only then could it become food. Imagine a shallow basket, carefully woven. Imagine pale acorn meal resting inside it. Water passes through, slow and clear. Nearby, children watch, not because anyone has announced a lesson, but because this is how lessons live, in repeated motion, in silence, in the confidence of hands. When the meal was ready, it could be cooked into a soft mush, warm and nourishing, sometimes eaten with fish, meat, greens, or other foods of the season. It was plain in the way essential things are plain. It did not need to impress. It needed to sustain. Acorn mush reminds us that ancient food was often a conversation with difficulty. The oak gave abundance, but not without a condition. The people answered with time, tools, baskets, water, and inherited knowledge. There is dignity in that patience. A bowl of acorn mush was not only a meal, it was autumn stored in the body. It was the forest made gentle enough to eat. 19. Monoman, wild rice of the Great Lakes. Far from the oak groves, in the lakes and slow waters of the north, another harvest waited, not in fields, but on the surface of the water. At dawn, the canoe moves quietly. Mist hangs low. The reeds stand tall around the people inside the boat. One person poles through the rice beds. Another uses long sticks to bend the grain heads gently over the canoe and tap them, letting the ripe grains fall with a soft patter onto the floor. The motion is careful. Too much force would damage what must return next year. A good harvest is not taken violently, it is invited. Among Ojibwe and other indigenous communities of the Great Lakes region, manuman, often translated as wild rice, though it is its own sacred and ecological food, held deep importance. It grew where water, mud, season, and care came together. It could be gathered, dried, parched, danced, or threshed to loosen the husk, winnowed in the wind, and stored for the long, cold months. Think of the smell of parching rice over a fire. The grain darkens, smoke clings to it. Hands stir it carefully so it will not burn. Later, when snow closes the paths and lakes harden under ice, that rice can be cooked again. It swells in water. It becomes warm, nutty, strong. A bowl of monoman might be eaten with fish, game, berries, maple sugar, or broth, depending on place and season. But beyond its nourishment, it carried relationship. It tied people to wetlands, to migration stories, to ceremony, to the responsibility of protecting the waters where it grows. This is one of the great truths of ancient American foodways. Food was not only produced, it was lived with. The lake was not a warehouse. The rice bed was not merely a resource. It was part of a world of obligations, human to plant, plant to water, water to community, community to future generations. As the canoe glides through the mist, every falling grain sounds small. But together, those grains could carry a people through winter. 18. Fire-roasted and smoked salmon. Along the rivers and coasts of the Northwest, the year could be measured by the return of salmon. Cold water moves over stone. The river is alive with silver bodies, fighting upstream, muscle against current, instinct against distance. People wait near the banks with tools shaped by generations of observation. They know the bends, the shallows, the timing, the danger. They know that the salmon's return is not simply an opportunity, it is an event. Among many indigenous communities of the Northwest Coast and interior river systems, salmon became central to food, trade, ceremony, and survival. It could be cooked fresh near the fire, its skin crisping in heat, its flesh rich and fragrant. But the greater skill was preservation. Fish could be split open and hung on racks. Smoke moved through the drying houses. Wind did part of the work. Fire did the rest. Slowly, moisture left the flesh, and the salmon changed from a meal of the moment into food for later, for winter, for travel, for visitors, for times when the river was quiet. Picture the racks standing in the smoky air. Picture hands turning fish, checking texture, judging weather. A child watches an elder test a strip of drying salmon. No written chart is needed. The knowledge is in the eye, the nose, the fingers. This was not merely cooking. It was planning beyond hunger. To preserve salmon was to think months ahead. It was to trust that the cold season would come, and to meet it before it arrived. It was to take the river's abundance and stretch it across time. And in the smoke there was memory of every return before and every return hoped for after. 17. Pemmican/wasna. Beyond the wet forests and river smoke, the land opens. Grass moves in long waves beneath the sky. The wind has room here. It travels without walls, bending the prairie, carrying dust, cold, heat, and the scent of animals long before they are seen. On the northern plains, where distance itself could become a challenge, food had to be more than comforting. It had to travel. It had to endure. Bison provided meat, hide, bone, sinew, tools, shelter, clothing, and strength. But fresh meat is a brief gift unless it is preserved. So ancient and ancestral communities developed ways to dry it, pound it, mix it with rendered fat, and sometimes combine it with berries. Among some plains communities, forms of this food were known as wasna. In broader historical contexts, pemmican became a name used for this concentrated survival food. Imagine strips of meat drying in the sun and wind. They darken, they stiffen. Their moisture leaves them slowly, leaving behind something dense and lasting. Later, the dried meat is pounded into shreds or powder. Fat is warmed until it becomes liquid and golden. The mixture is pressed together, heavy with energy, and stored. It does not look like a feast. It looks practical, almost silent. But there is power in it. A small portion could carry a hunter across open country. It could feed families in the cold months. It could be packed for long journeys, traded across distance, or used when fresh food was scarce. In a land where weather could turn and herds could move beyond reach, this was food shaped by realism. The hands that made it understood hunger. They understood movement. They understood that the body is a fire, and that in winter or on the trail, the fire must be fed. There is a different kind of beauty in food like this. Not the beauty of decoration, but the beauty of reliability. It is the beauty of people who looked at an immense landscape and learned how to carry strength with them. 16. Three Sisters Corn Soup. Where the plains roll into woodlands and cultivated clearings, another kind of wisdom rises from the soil. Three plants stand together. Corn grows tall, reaching upward. Beans climb its stalks, winding green around strength. Squash spreads below, its broad leaves shading the ground, holding moisture, discouraging weeds. To many indigenous communities, especially across parts of the eastern woodlands and beyond, maize, beans, and squash were more than crops planted side by side. They were companions. The three sisters offered a lesson that could be seen with the eyes and tasted in the bowl. A soup or stew made from these foods carried balance. Corn offered substance. Beans brought protein and depth. Squash gave sweetness, body, and softness. Together, they became something more complete than any one of them alone. Picture a cooking pot near the fire. Kernels of maize soften in water. Beans swell and darken the broth. Squash collapses slowly into gold. Steam rises into the evening air. Someone stirs with a wooden tool worn smooth by use. Around the fire, people come in from fields, from hunting, from gathering wood, from watching children. The day's labor gathers itself around the pot. This was not only agriculture, it was design. The field itself was a form of knowledge, a living arrangement in which each plant helped the others. The meal reflected the same principle. Nothing stood alone. The corn needed the bean needed the corn. The squash protected the ground. People cared for the field, and the field cared for the people. In a modern kitchen, a bowl of corn, beans, and squash may seem simple, but simplicity can hide entire civilizations of observation. It can hide generations of seed saving, planting, harvest, ceremony, and memory. A Three Sisters stew is a quiet reminder that survival in ancient America was often cooperative, not only among people, but among plants. Not only in the home, but in the soil. And when the pot was opened, what rose from it was not merely steam. It was the scent of relationship. 15. Peaky bread. Farther southwest, where the land becomes dry and open, where mesas rise like old stone ships from the desert, corn took another form. In Hopi and other Pueblo foodways, maize was never just one thing. It could be ground, boiled, roasted, dried, prayed over, carried, planted, and transformed into colors that seemed to hold the sky itself. Blue, yellow, white, red. One of the most delicate expressions of this knowledge is peaky bread. The scene is almost impossibly precise. A smooth stone is heated. Batter made from finely ground corn is prepared, sometimes with alkaline ash that changes its color and texture. The cook's hand moves quickly across the hot surface, spreading the batter in a thin, even layer. There is no hesitation. Too slow, and it tears. Too thick, and it fails. Too hot, and it burns. The sheet lifts from the stone like paper, like cloth, like a fragment of desert light. Peaky is not a food that can be rushed by someone who does not understand it. It demands timing, touch, heat, and discipline. It is often associated with women's knowledge, with family, with ceremony, with the long apprenticeship of watching before doing. The bread itself may be thin and fragile, but the skill behind it is not fragile at all. It is strong because it has been protected. Imagine the quiet concentration in the room, the heat of the stone, the smell of toasted corn, stacks of folded peaky gathering slowly, layer by layer. Outside, wind moves dust across the ground. Inside, the cook makes something so light it seems almost weightless. Yet behind it stands the heavy labor of planting corn in a dry land. That is what makes peaky so powerful as a memory. It holds a contradiction, delicacy born from endurance. A people who farm where rain cannot be taken for granted must learn patience. They must learn where to plant, when to pray, how to store, how to share, how to turn grain into food that carries meaning beyond hunger. In the thin blue sheets of peaky bread, the desert is not empty. It is speaking. 14. Nixtamalized tortillas. Now the story moves south, into the wide and deeply cultivated world of Mesoamerica, where maize did not merely feed people. It shaped calendars, markets, cities, stories, and daily life. But maize by itself is not the whole miracle. The deeper miracle is what ancient cooks learned to do with it. Dried kernels were cooked or soaked with alkaline materials such as lime or ash, depending on place and tradition. This process, now often called nixtamalization, changed the grain. It softened the hull. It improved the dough. It made nutrients more available. It gave maize a new smell, a new texture, a new strength. Before the tortilla touches the fire, there is water, stone, and repetition. The maize is washed. The kernels are rubbed between hands. The softened grain is placed on a metate, and the grinding begins. Forward and back, forward and back, stone over stone. The sound is low and steady, like work becoming music. The dough that forms is not lifeless. It is warm from the hands, damp, fragrant, and responsive. A cook pats it into a round, turning it with practiced ease. Then it meets the comal. A tortilla begins as something soft and pale. Then heat takes hold. It firms, darkens in spots, releases steam. Sometimes it inflates for a breath, as if the fire has given it a small soul. Then it is lifted, stacked, wrapped, kept warm. In many Mesoamerican communities, tortillas were not a side dish. They were the center around which other foods gathered. Beans, squash, chiles, fish, game, greens, sauces. A tortilla could be a plate, a spoon, a wrapper, a meal in the hand. This is one of the great technologies of ancient food. Transformation so ordinary that it becomes invisible. Everyday life can hide genius. A tortilla is simple only after thousands of hands have made it so. Behind it is agriculture, chemistry, grinding stones, fire control, seed saving, and the quiet authority of cooks who knew exactly when the dough was ready. When we imagine ancient cities waking in the morning, markets opening, footsteps crossing plazas, smoke rising from courtyards, we should hear the sound of maize being ground. It was the sound of a world beginning its day. 13. Tamales. If the tortilla is maize made immediate, the tamal is maize made patient. A tamal begins with preparation, with intention. Masa is spread into a leaf or husk. Inside may go beans, squash, chiles, fish, turkey, game, seeds, herbs, or other fillings depending on region, season, and community. Then it is folded, tied, and placed with others to steam. The tamal does not reveal itself at once. It waits. Inside the bundle, heat moves slowly. The maize firms around its filling. Leaves soften and release their scent. Steam gathers in the cooking vessel and rises in clouds. The food becomes protected, sealed away, almost hidden. Imagine a household before a ceremony, a journey, or a day of heavy work. Hands prepare tamales in rhythm. Someone spreads the masa. Someone adds the filling. Someone folds. Someone tends the fire. The work can be communal, almost conversational, even when few words are spoken. Tamales were suited to movement and gathering. They could be carried. They could be shared. They could be prepared in many forms, from plain and humble to rich and ceremonial. Across Mesoamerica, evidence and later accounts suggest that maize dough cooked in wrappers had deep roots and many variations. What makes the tamal so human is the act of wrapping. To wrap food is to think of someone later. It is to prepare nourishment before hunger arrives. It is to place care inside a leaf and trust that heat will complete what the hands began. When a tamal is opened, steam escapes like a memory being released. The leaf pulls back, the maize appears, the scent rises. For a moment, all the hidden labor becomes visible. 12. Pozole/hominy stew. There are foods made for the hand, and there are foods made for the bowl. Pozole, or hominy stew in its many ancestral forms, belongs to the second kind. It is food that gathers people, food that needs a pot, food that asks for time. At its heart are kernels of maize transformed through nixtamalization, swelling into large, tender grains. They open slowly in water, becoming soft but still distinct. Around them, broth deepens. Chiles may bring warmth. Herbs may sharpen the air. Meat, beans, squash, or other ingredients may join the pot, depending on place and context. But the soul of the dish is the maize itself. No longer hard seed, no longer dough, but something between. Whole, softened, resilient. Picture a large vessel near the fire. The surface trembles. Steam fogs the face of the person stirring it. Outside, a village or city continues its movement. Inside, the pot holds its own kind of time. Stews like this matter because they turn individual ingredients into a shared center. A tortilla can be taken in the hand and carried away. A stew asks people to pause. It asks them to sit, to be served, to return to the fire. The pot is one of humanity's oldest gathering places. In ancient America, as elsewhere, it held more than food. It held conversation, fatigue, recovery, news, mourning, celebration. After planting, after harvest, after travel, after ritual, a warm bowl could bring the body back to itself. The softened maize in a pozole-like stew carries the memory of stone and water before it ever reaches the fire. It has already been changed once. In the pot, it changes again. That is why this dish belongs in the story. It shows that ancient cooking was not a single action, but a chain of transformations. Seed to field, field to harvest, harvest to storage, storage to soaking, soaking to pot, pot to bowl, bowl to body, and then, through the body, back into work, song, travel, sleep, and life. 11. Atole. Before the heat of the day, before markets fill and roads grow bright with dust, there is the morning drink. Atole is warm maize in a cup or bowl, sometimes thin enough to drink, sometimes thicker, closer to porridge. It can be plain, comforting, nourishing. In some places and periods, it may have been flavored with ingredients such as chili, honey, fruit, or cacao, depending on availability and tradition. But even in its simplest form, it carries a deep tenderness. Imagine a child waking in the dim light. The air is cool. A fire has been coaxed back from embers. A clay vessel warms near the flame. Ground maize is stirred into water until it thickens. The cook watches closely because grain can settle, scorch, or clump if neglected. The steam smells of corn and ash and mourning. Atole is not dramatic. It does not announce power like a feast. It belongs to the intimate hours, to elders whose teeth may no longer manage hard foods, to children needing strength, to workers leaving early, to anyone who must begin the day with warmth inside them. This is another face of ancient cuisine. Not only survival against danger, not only ceremonies and great gatherings, but care, the kind of care that says, eat before you go. Drink this while it is warm. Take strength with you. Atole reminds us that food history is also the history of small mercies. The world of ancient America was full of labor. Fields to tend, water to carry, wood to gather, tools to repair, animals to watch, children to raise. A warm maize drink could soften the edge of the morning before that labor began. In the rising steam, we can almost see a household becoming awake. A hand passes a bowl. The day begins. 10. Cacao drink. And then, in the warm lands where cacao trees could grow beneath shade and humidity, another kind of drink entered the story. Darker, more bitter, more ceremonial. Not chocolate as many people know it today. No sugar-heavy sweetness. No square wrapped in paper. No dessert at the end of a meal. In ancient Mesoamerica, cacao was often prepared as a drink. Beans were fermented, dried, roasted, ground, and mixed with water. The liquid could be poured from vessel to raise foam, that prized surface of air and richness. In some places and moments, it may have been combined with chili, flowers, vanilla, honey, maize, or other ingredients. Its flavor could be earthy, bitter, fragrant, and alive with heat. Imagine a painted vessel held carefully in two hands. The drink inside is dark. Its surface trembles. Foam clings to the rim. The person who receives it may be a guest, a trader, a noble, a participant in ritual, or someone being honored. Cacao was not only nourishment. In many Mesoamerican contexts, it carried value, status, exchange, and meaning. The tree itself does not grow everywhere. That matters. Cacao's journey from humid groves to distant cities tells us of trade routes, relationships, and desire. A cup of cacao might carry the memory of many hands before it reached the mouth. Growers, fermenters, travelers, merchants, cooks. It is easy to think of ancient food only as what filled the stomach. But cacao reminds us that taste can also mark respect. It can announce welcome. It can belong to ceremony. It can become part of diplomacy, wealth, marriage, offering, and memory. There is something intimate about a bitter drink. It asks the person tasting it to slow down. Sweetness rushes toward us, but bitterness makes us listen. The tongue has to understand it. The body has to accept it. In the dim light of a room with clay walls holding the day's warmth, a cacao drink may have passed from hand to hand with a seriousness that no modern candy could ever fully explain. The cup was small. The world behind it was vast. 9. Amaranth cakes. Where maize dominated so much of Mesoamerican life, it did not stand alone. Other seeds carried strength too. Amaranth is tiny, but tiny things can endure. Its grains are small enough to disappear into the palm, yet together they can become flour, porridge, cakes, and offerings. In certain Mesoamerican communities, amaranth was valued as food and, at times, as part of ritual life. It could be toasted, ground, mixed, shaped, and eaten in forms that gave energy to the body and meaning to the moment. Picture a clay pan over the heat. Seeds are stirred as they toast. They shift from pale to golden, releasing a nutty scent. Nearby, honey or another binding sweetness may be warmed. The grains are pressed together. The cake cools and firms. It is simple work, but it requires attention. Seeds burn quickly. Heat must be watched. Texture must be judged. A cake made from amaranth is not heavy like a stew or broad like a tortilla. It is concentrated. It can be held. It can be carried. It can be shared in small pieces. It speaks of fields where many crops grew together, and of cooks who knew how to use every scale of food, from great ears of corn to seeds no larger than a whisper. This is where we must pause carefully. When we speak of ancient foods connected to ceremony, we should not turn them into spectacle. We should not flatten sacred practices into entertainment. It is enough to say that among certain communities, some foods were not separated from spiritual life. They belonged to worlds where planting, eating, offering, and remembering could be connected. Amaranth asks us to respect that connection. Food was never only physical. It could carry prayer. It could carry obligation. It could carry fear, gratitude, and hope. The seed entered the body, and the body remained part of the larger order of rain, soil, sun, ancestors, and gods. To eat was to live. But in many ancient worlds, to live was also to answer. 8. Seed and chili sauces. The fire burns lower now, and on the grinding stone there is another transformation taking place. Seeds, chilies, herbs, perhaps tomato, tomatillo, or other local ingredients depending on region and season. The cook does not need a written recipe. The recipe lives in memory, in smell, in the slight change of sound when roasted seeds become ready beneath the hand. Before the modern word mole came to describe many rich and complex sauces, Mesoamerica already had deep traditions of ground sauces, mixtures that brought together heat, fat, earthiness, acidity, and aroma. Pumpkin seeds could be toasted and ground into a thick base. Chilies could be charred, soaked, and crushed. The sauce might be poured over fish, game, turkey, vegetables, tamales, or maize. A sauce is easy to underestimate. It is not the largest thing on the table. It may not be the food that fills the belly most directly, but it changes everything it touches. It carries complexity. It allows cooks to layer flavor from ingredients that might otherwise seem separate. It can make the lean rich, the plain memorable, the daily meal worthy of pause. Imagine the grinding stone again. The cook leans forward. Roasted seeds break down beneath pressure. Chilies leave color on the stone. The paste darkens, thickens, becomes fragrant. A little water loosens it. Heat wakes it. The sauce begins to shine. This kind of cooking tells us that ancient American cuisine was not merely about what people had available. It was about what they knew how to make from it. Flavor itself was a craft. In the markets and homes of Mesoamerica, foods moved through many hands and many forms. Maize became masa. Seeds became paste. Chilies became warmth. Cacao became drink. Leaves became wrappers. Clay became vessels. Stone became the instrument through which raw ingredients were persuaded into something human. And as the story leaves the great maize worlds of Mesoamerica, it does not leave transformation behind. It follows another route, a route that could poison the careless, feed the skilled, and cross islands, forests, and generations as one of the most important foods of the tropical Americas. 7. Cassava. In the Caribbean, the story of food bends toward the root of the cassava plant. Above ground, cassava does not look dramatic. It does not tower like maize or shimmer like wild rice. It stands with slender stems and spreading leaves, quiet under the sun. But beneath the soil, its roots are dense with possibility and danger. Some forms of cassava contain bitterness and compounds that must be removed before the food is safe. To those without knowledge, it could be harmful. To skilled cooks, it became bread that could last, travel, and feed communities across islands and tropical lowlands. Among Taino and other Caribbean communities, cassava was transformed into cassave, a thin flatbread made through careful work. The root was pulled from the earth, peeled, washed, and grated. The pulp was pressed to draw out liquid. It might be squeezed in woven tubes or other pressing devices, the dangerous juices removed by pressure and patience. Then the damp meal was spread thin across a heated surface. Picture the heat rising from a flat griddle. The cassava meal is pale and coarse at first, scattered like sand. Hands shape it into a circle. Slowly it binds. Moisture leaves. The bread firms, turns, dries, and becomes something light but durable. Cassave could be stored. It could be carried across water. It could feed people when storms came, when fishing was uncertain, when travel separated families from fresh harvests. It was not soft like a fresh tortilla or warm like a morning drink. It was practical, resilient, almost ship-like in its ability to move from place to place. There is a kind of intelligence in dry bread. It says, "We know hunger may come later." It says, "We know the sea can delay us." It says, "We know abundance must sometimes be saved in a form that will not spoil." On an island, food knowledge is also weather knowledge. It is hurricane knowledge, fishing knowledge, soil knowledge, canoe knowledge. A bread that lasts is a defense against uncertainty. Cassave reminds us again that ancient American dishes were often technologies in disguise. A root becomes pulp. Pulp becomes meal. Meal becomes bread. Danger becomes nourishment. Perishable harvest becomes stored strength. And all of it depends on the hands that know what to remove, what to keep, when to press, when to turn, when to trust the fire. 6. Cassava bread of the tropical lowlands. The cassava story does not end with the islands. Across parts of Amazonia and the tropical lowlands of South America, cassava became one of the great foundations of life. In some regions, archaeologists believe its cultivation and processing go back thousands of years. But again, the importance of cassava is not only that people grew it. The deeper story is how they mastered it. A bitter root is pulled from wet soil. Rain has darkened the ground. The air is heavy with leaves and insects. The forest is not silent. It hums, drips, clicks, breathes. In a clearing, people work with practiced focus. Cassava roots are peeled and grated. The pulp is washed, strained, pressed, dried, and cooked. Each step matters. None can be treated casually. In many communities, cassava processing involved tools made from plant fibers, wood, stone, and ceramic surfaces. Woven presses could squeeze the pulp with remarkable force. Sieves separated texture. Flat cooking surfaces turned meal into breads, cakes, or crisp sheets. The liquid and starch could be used in other ways, depending on tradition and preparation. There is nothing accidental about this. To make cassava safe and useful, ancient cooks had to understand process, timing, texture, and risk. They had to teach it clearly. A child watching could not simply be told, "Cook the root." That would not be enough. The knowledge had steps. The steps had reasons. The reasons had consequences. This is where food becomes law without being written. Do it this way. Do not skip this. Wait until it feels like this. Press until the liquid runs. Cook until the surface changes. In a humid world where many foods spoil quickly, cassava offered another kind of security. Once processed into dry bread or flour, it could last longer. It could accompany travel by river. It could support villages where fishing, gardening, gathering, and hunting all wove together into seasonal life. Imagine a round cassava bread cooling near the fire. Its surface is dry and faintly rough. Beside it, fish may roast. A pot may simmer. Children may carry water. Smoke rises into the green darkness at the edge of the clearing. To an outsider, the bread may seem plain, but plainness, again, is misleading. Inside that bread is botanical knowledge, engineering, women's labor, household rhythm, and the memory of every mistake the ancestors learned not to repeat. It is the forest made safe by intelligence. It is danger disciplined into food. And from the wet lowlands, the story climbs upward, toward thin air, cold mornings, and fields that cling to the sides of mountains. 5. Quinoa porridge and stew. High in the Andes, the world changes. The air grows sharper. Breath becomes visible in the morning. Sunlight can burn by day, while night brings cold that settles into bone. Fields climb slopes where every step costs effort. Clouds pass close enough to seem like animals moving across the land. Here, ancient Andean communities learned to farm and cook in a vertical world. Quinoa, with its small seeds and remarkable hardiness, became one of the foods suited to these heights. It could grow where other crops struggled. It offered nourishment in a place where strength was needed not only for labor, but for altitude itself. Imagine a woman standing beside a field of quinoa. The plants are red, gold, green, or purple, their seed heads bright against the mountain light. Harvesting them is work of the hands and back. Seeds must be gathered, dried, cleaned, and washed to remove their natural bitterness. Then they can be cooked into porridge, soups, or stews, often alongside tubers, herbs, or other Andean foods. A pot of quinoa does not command attention like a feast in an earth oven. It thickens quietly. The grains open, releasing a mild, earthy scent. In a cold morning house, steam from the pot might soften the air. Someone cups their hands around a bowl, letting warmth enter before the first mouthful. In such a landscape, warmth is not a luxury. It is survival. Quinoa porridge or stew speaks of adaptation. It belongs to people who understood that the mountains were not one environment, but many stacked one above another. Lower valleys, high slopes, cold plateaus. Each gave different foods, different risks, different possibilities. The Andean world required movement, planning, storage, exchange, and deep attention to elevation. A bowl of quinoa could hold that whole vertical map. It could be eaten by farmers before going to fields, by travelers crossing cold paths, by families gathered in the blue light before sunrise. It was food for endurance, but also food for belonging, a taste of the highlands themselves. The Andes do not give life easily. They ask for lungs, legs, patience, and memory. And the people answered not by conquering the mountains, but by learning their moods. They learned what could grow near the frost line. They learned how to dry, store, and trade. They learned which seeds could hold strength in a place where the air was thin and the earth was steep. In the steam rising from quinoa, we can see that answer. Quiet, practical, ancient. 4. Chuño and potato stew. In the same mountains, another food tells an even colder story. At night, potatoes are laid out beneath the open sky. The ground is hard. The stars are sharp. Frost settles over the tubers until they stiffen in the dark. By morning, the sun rises with a brightness that seems almost merciless. The frozen potatoes begin to thaw. Then, human feet press them, squeezing out moisture, breaking their skins, helping the cold and sunlight do their work again and again. This is chuño, potatoes transformed by frost, pressure, and drying into a food that can last for years. It is one of the great storage technologies of the Andes. Not technology made of metal or wheels or engines, but technology made from climate, patience, and knowledge. The mountains themselves become part of the kitchen. Night freezes, day dries, feet press, hands sort. Time finishes what the people began. Potatoes were among the great gifts of the Andean world, grown in astonishing variety across different elevations and microclimates. Some were small, some dark, some bitter, some suited to cold lands where other crops would fail. But fresh potatoes do not keep forever. Chuño changed that. Imagine a storehouse in a highland community. Inside are dried foods that hold the future at a distance. Potatoes made light and durable, grains, dried meat, other supplies carefully protected. Outside, weather can turn cruel. Hail can come, crops can fail, roads can close. But stored food gives people time. A stew made with chuño, or dried potatoes, carries this history into the bowl. The dried pieces soften slowly in water or broth. They take on warmth again. They become part of a meal with herbs, tubers, grains, or meat, depending on place and occasion. What was once frozen under stars now returns as steam. This is almost a resurrection. A potato pulled from the earth is given to the cold. The cold takes its softness. The sun takes its water. Human labor takes what remains and protects it. Months later, perhaps years later, the same food is placed in a pot and brought back toward life. In that transformation is a profound lesson. Ancient cooks did not merely react to hardship. They recruited hardship. They turned frost into preservation. They turned thin air into storage. They turned a dangerous climate into an ally. A bowl of chuño stew is not only food against hunger. It is proof that memory can be stored in the body of a root. 3. Charqui with tubers. Where potatoes were dried by frost and sun, meat too could be carried across time. In the Andes, llama and alpaca were not simply animals standing against the mountain wind. They were companions in labor, sources of fiber, carriers of goods, and, in some contexts, sources of meat. When meat needed to last, it could be cut thin, salted, or dried according to local methods, and exposed to air so that moisture left it behind. This dried meat is often known as charqui. Long before the modern word jerky passed into English from related roots, Andean communities were making preserved meat suited to travel, storage, and highland life. Strips could be dried until tough and concentrated, then stored or carried. Later, they could be softened in stews, eaten with potatoes, or combined with other foods that turned preservation back into nourishment. Picture a caravan path through the mountains. The trail is narrow. Stones shift underfoot. Pack animals move slowly, bells or cords stirring in the wind. People carry goods between ecological zones. Highland products, valley crops, coastal foods, forest goods. In such a world, food that travels matters deeply. A fresh meal belongs to one place and one moment. Dried meat can cross distance. Charqui with tubers brings together two Andean answers to uncertainty. Meat preserved by drying, potatoes adapted to cold and elevation. In a bowl, they become more than ingredients. They become a landscape of movement. The chew of dried meat, the softness of potato, the heat of broth, the smell of smoke, salt, earth, and animal life. This food speaks of roads, work, and endurance. It speaks of people who did not live in isolation, but in networks of exchange that climbed and descended the mountains. It speaks of storehouses, journeys, messengers, families, and workers who needed strength in places where the body was always aware of height. There is no excess in charqui. Nothing about it is careless. It is meat made serious by need. It is the opposite of waste. It says that an animal's life must be honored through use, through preservation, through sharing, through attention. And when it is cooked again with tubers, the hard strips surrender slowly to heat. What once seemed dry and severe becomes part of comfort. 2. Cuy. In Andean homes, another source of nourishment lived close to the household itself. Cuy, guinea pig, was raised in parts of the Andes long before the arrival of European livestock. In a world without chickens, pigs, sheep, or cattle, cuy offered an important source of protein in certain communities. Small animals could be kept near the home, fed with scraps and greens, and prepared for meals that might be everyday, festive, or ceremonial, depending on context. To understand cuy, we must set aside the modern habit of looking at another people's food with surprise before we look with respect. Every foodway grows from a place. In the Andes, large grazing lands, high elevations, household compounds, crop cycles, and local needs shaped what people raised and ate. Cuy belonged to that world. It did not require the same land as large herd animals. It could live near warmth. It could turn household plant matter into meat. It could feed a family. Imagine the inside of a highland dwelling. Smoke has darkened the roof beams. Outside, the air is cold, but inside, there is movement, breath, and heat. A meal is being prepared. Cuy may be roasted or stewed, depending on tradition. Its skin crisps near the fire, or its meat cooks slowly with herbs and tubers. People gather not as spectators of something strange, but as members of a household, receiving food from their own careful keeping. This is domestic knowledge. Not dramatic, perhaps, not monumental like stone architecture or empire roads, but just as important to life. History often remembers rulers, temples, battles, and walls. Food history remembers the small room where someone fed children. It remembers the animal kept near the hearth. It remembers the hand that portioned meat carefully so everyone received some. It remembers the work of making enough. Cuy reminds us that ancient American cuisine was not only about great crops and vast landscapes. It was also intimate. It lived in homes. It moved underfoot. It required feeding, tending, cleaning, cooking, sharing. A civilization is not sustained only by its grandest achievements. It is sustained by evening meals, by ordinary protein, by the quiet skill of people who knew how to turn limited space and difficult conditions into life. 1. Pachamanca. And now the story returns to the earth. In the Andes, there is a meal where the ground itself becomes the cooking vessel. Stones are heated in fire until they hold a deep, almost hidden heat. A pit is prepared. Food is gathered. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, maize, beans, herbs, and, in some traditions, meat. The exact ingredients vary by region, community, season, and era, but the principle is ancient and powerful. Heat the stones, open the earth, place the food inside, cover it, wait. This is pachamanca, often understood as an Andean earth oven tradition. Its name is commonly connected with earth and pot, or earth as vessel. But beyond translation, what matters is the feeling of it. Food cooked not above the land, but within it. Imagine the preparation. People gather around the fire as stones blacken and glow. Smoke rises into mountain air. Hands move quickly because the moment matters. Hot stones are placed with care. Tubers go in, still carrying the shape of the soil they came from. Herbs release their scent as they touch heat. Meat, if included, settles among the layers. Leaves, cloth, or earth may cover the pit according to local practice. Then the meal disappears. For a time there is nothing to see, only a mound, only faint steam, only waiting. That waiting is part of the food. People talk. Children circle nearby. Elders watch the signs of heat and time. The land is quiet, but beneath the surface, transformation is happening. Moisture becomes steam. Stones give back the fire they borrowed. The pit holds everything together in darkness. When it is opened, the smell rises first. Earth, herbs, sweetness, smoke, fat, potato, maize. The food emerges changed, softened by heat that feels older than the hands that placed it there. And in that moment, pachamanca becomes more than a cooking method. It becomes a gathering, a recognition that people eat from the land, with the land, and because of the land. It is the right place for this journey to end, because before Columbus, across the Americas, food was never just a list of ingredients. It was knowledge shaped by rivers, deserts, forests, islands, wetlands, plains, and mountains. It was the bitter acorn made gentle by water, the wild rice gathered without destroying the bed, the salmon preserved in smoke, the maize transformed by ash and stone, the cassava made safe by pressure, the potato preserved by frost, the earth opened as an oven. These dishes remind us that ancient American communities were not waiting to be taught how to live. They were already living with extraordinary intelligence. They knew how to read the sky for weather, the soil for planting, the river for returning fish, the mountain night for freezing food, the forest root for danger and nourishment. They built cuisines from attention. They built survival from memory. They built flavor from patience. And although many of those old fires have gone out, their smoke has not vanished completely. It remains in the foods still cooked today, in corn dough pressed by hand, in cassava bread drying over heat, in wild rice stirred in a pot, in potatoes lifted from Andean soil, in the shared silence before a meal begins. To remember these foods is to remember the people who made them, not as shadows before history, but as farmers, fishers, hunters, gatherers, cooks, traders, parents, children, and keepers of land-based knowledge. Before Columbus, the Americas were already full of meals, full of hands, full of smoke, full of memory. And beneath every ancient dish was the same quiet truth. The land fed the people, and the people learned how to listen.